next guest doesn't sugarcoat the entrepreneurial story of his life, and I quote this from his webpage. I've made a lot of mistakes and been responsible for epic failures. And over the years, I've said no to investments that turned out to be unicorns and spent way too much time in endless meetings. But a couple of years ago, he cleared his schedule and embarked on a journey to understand where the technology is taking us, in how we need to act in regards to this very disruptive force. And it's fundamentally changing the way we do business. How should we apply this to our lives? Well, maybe the answer to all of this lies in our history. This is Nicklas Bergman.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, technology as it is, and there it is. Yeah. What's interesting, and what we've heard throughout the last hour here or so, is that we've heard about AI, mobile first, mobile only, 3D printing just now a couple of minutes ago. And for me, it's interesting because it doesn't really matter what kind of technology it is. It gets accepted into our lives and into society in roughly the same way. And if I could try to share with you two perspectives that I find very relevant in what's happening with technology as of now. The first perspective is that we accept technology into our lives in roughly the same way, independently if it's the steam engine or if it's the car. First, we experiment. We don't really know how to use and what to use a new innovation for. We try out different things. Eventually, we find the use cases, like with the computers and Windows 95, the PC in the mid-90s. We started going online, et cetera, So slowly, it started changing our perspective of business and everyday lives, sort of. The third perspective of this, the third step, is when a new innovation totally transforms what we're doing. In this case, with the computers, with IT, it's of course the smartphones, right? They're everywhere. We live with them 24/7. The first thing we do in the morning, the last thing we do before we go to bed, and it's just everywhere. We build our lives, we build society, we build our companies around these gadgets. And that's all nice, that's good. So that's the first perspective here. To experiment, to see how we find the best use cases and examples and applications, and then it transforms the way we live and work. The second perspective that I find really interesting with technology is the fact that we see second and third order effects of many new innovations. Take the example of autonomous driving, for example. Cars, I mean, we're not very good drivers, right? What happens if we get autonomous cars? Yeah, we'll save roughly 1 million lives in traffic every year. All good, all nice, but the challenge here is that we'll also have a big challenge when it comes to the understanding and getting connected and getting things into, for organ donors, for example. Meaning that we solve one problem and create another one. And those are the second and third order effects that I find really, really interesting, curious about it, but it's also very, very challenging trying to understand and see these things. So for me, working as a venture capitalist, as an investor, as an entrepreneur in technology, I try to understand all these different things. And for me, it's an ongoing process, a steady ongoing process in trying to analyze what's out there, to assess the implications, and then to adapt. I'm just going to go through very briefly what I'm seeing as an investor. I'm working with a large pan-European fund. And what are we seeing? What are we interested in? And when I meet with scientists, researchers, innovators, crazy people that have all these ideas, what are the main areas of interest that we are seeing? Well, to start with, we see an ever-increasing speed in connectivity. We have it in our phones with 4G and 5G, faster and faster fiber nets, meaning that we can stream Netflix and YouTube and everything 24/7. So that's on the consumer side. On the business side, we can see this in predictive maintenance, understanding what's happening with a piece of machinery out in the field. We can see it in a hospital environment, remote surgery, and to have a good connection, low latency. I mean, that's crucial both for the patient and for the surgeon, of course. So these things are really interesting. What we have already out there is, of course, the Internet of Things. Lots of things happening there. Maybe not the earliest, closest to what we are looking at as investors, but some of the applications We see a lot of cases where IoT is being used to create a better user experience and improve sales, etc. Cloud computing, same thing there, has been around for quite some time, fascinating as it is, relevant for many companies today. What we are seeing is we call edge computing, where we actually push the computing power and the decision making in a processor out closer to the end user. Modern car is a great example of that, where we actually see that we're going from maybe a handful or a dozen processors in an automobile to maybe hundreds or even thousands of processors today, meaning that we increase the computing power at the source of the information. Close to that is everything that is happening in mobility. I mean, in Stockholm, where I'm now, we have all these different companies providing electrical scooters. It's a pain, it's a gain, all these things happening, and it's really, really amazing that we have business development in the making, trying to understand how these things can operate and work in our cities. Other cities, for Copenhagen, for example, you've solved it in a totally different way. And I mean, the jury is still out there. We'll see where this eventually will take us. But what's also fascinating is that from an experimentation perspective, we've been dealing with autonomous driving for quite some time. We know that eventually, if and when this will happen, there will be all these new interesting applications. There will be different ways that we will use it. We will change our behavior based on this innovation. The same thing here. The jury is still out there. We don't really know when this will happen. We don't really know how and if this will happen. The challenge here is all these fringe cases. Nice road, summer weather, everything is simple. Then, of course, a car can drive itself today. But we have the fringe cases, the strange cases where the cars, the systems don't really understand what's happening. Like with this one, where an autonomous system thinks that the moon is actually a traffic light, meaning that it's a big challenge for the system to understand what's actually happening. Another area where we are looking into quite a lot now is quantum computing. I mean, this holy grail of computing, being able to solve problems that are inaccessible to normal computing. In finance, in protein folding, in logistics, all these areas, but the main challenge and the main opportunity here is in crypto, where encryption can be easily solved with quantum computing, meaning that all the big countries, China, the US, even in Europe, all countries are working very hard of actually trying to solve this to get a head start towards the competition. So it's a global power play, an arms race in quantum, so to speak. Another interesting area that we are seeing now is drones. Drones have been around for quite some time. It's been a very big regulatory challenge, and we've seen that, meaning that the use cases the original use cases that we were seeing haven't been really that obvious. We start seeing some delivery opportunities. UPS, for example, got granted their first application to actually be able to use drones for deliveries just less than 2 years ago. Other areas that are interesting are indoors, for example, and in greenhouses, in warehouses, where the regulatory challenge is not that obvious, where you can actually manage a whole system without interference from the outside, meaning that here we start seeing some really, really interesting use cases and drones as this technology for surveillance or monitoring of crops or in logistics, in warehousing. These things are really, really taking off now. Continuing, we're seeing in augmented reality, virtual reality, very, very interesting things happening. VR as a concept was really, really taking off a couple of years ago. Lots of venture money being invested. Bit of a challenge with the social aspect of it, actually. It's not really, really that easy to find the good solutions, to find the good use cases. I have several of them just lying back home, and the kids are not really that interested in it. Enter instead augmented reality, mixed reality, where we see through a lens, where we actually are still connected to our surroundings. So for example, for a service environment, you get help from the outside from a remote service technician, for example. Gaming, same thing there, really, really interesting. Lots of applications coming out of that. Still in its infancy, but interesting things happening, and I think this is the way we will interact with information in all its different forms in the future. More this than through our smartphone screens or laptops or whatever it is. Also in healthcare, we see interesting applications here. Being able to see the inside of a body before you take the scalpel out. Really, really useful for a surgeon in this case. AR and VR, as with many or even all other technologies, are giving us all these opportunities, of course. But we're also facing challenges. How should we use these things? I don't think you should just say yes to everything. You need to be a bit curious and at the same time a bit skeptical about it. Try to form your own opinions, understand how this will help you, and see how you should make sure that it works for you and does not take over your lives. So this goes with AR, VR, and all these different other technologies that I'm mentioning. Another perspective of this is, of course, robotics. We see robotics. It's been around for many, many years in industrial manufacturing. We see that the path in the last couple of years has been to make them as general as possible, as humanoid as possible. Doesn't really work all the time. It is a challenge, meaning that, same thing here, we're taking a step back. Researchers, developers are going another path and creating specific robots that can do one or a couple of specific tasks. Like this one, for example, working in a hospital environment with UV light to sterilize surfaces. Same thing goes with AI. Also in holy grail in what we're seeing. And we've heard about all these interesting examples here today, how AI and data analytics is being used, and we know for sure that they can beat us in all these different games that we are seeing. From a venture perspective, from an investor perspective, this is still very much lipstick on a pig. We are in the midst of an AI bubble in my world, where we see that almost half of all startups in Europe that are working in AI don't really have an AI component in their offering, and that is a big challenge. But so short term, still some challenges in finding the good use cases in AI. Long term, definitely really, really interesting. So how do we cope with this? I mean, it's easy to just like be mesmerized and scared. I think that the wrong thing to do is look the other way. I think we really, really need to embrace these things. As I said, be curious, a bit skeptical, but still embrace it and realize that this will be here indefinitely. It's just our perspective and view of this and how we should use it. So that's the first part, is analyzing what's out there. The second part is to assess the implications. How will this affect me? How will it affect my competition, for example? The value chain, the structure of the value chain, the power players in the value chain, how will that change? How will I be able to provide new things for my customers? Will they demand new things from me based on these new innovations? And then, of course, the third perspective that we've heard of here is also around the inner workings of our companies, how we can be more productive, how we can understand more about our customers, of our organizations, how we can organize work in a different way. And so after having understood what's out there, what different innovation areas are happening, how it affects me, of course, the last perspective of this is to adapt to this new reality. Constant adaptation. I need to understand, I need to realize that I have to change and be updated. And of course, this has to do with uncertainty, with the environment, with the ethical perspectives of technology. Even simpler, more closely to this today maybe, is how we can work with it and our business models and how the way we do business is changing. One example here is Spotify that didn't only manage to set together a whole set of technologies around 15 years ago and introduce them in a new market. They also managed to introduce a totally new business model. And that is really, really impressive, to introduce the technologies at the same time as you are changing how a market works. I mean, we don't buy music anymore. We subscribe to music service. So with that, thank you very much, and may the future be with you. I'm sure it will, at least for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicklas. Step down to the floor here with me, and I have a few follow-up questions for you. So, Sweden is the next most innovative country in the world, according to ranking, and then close up is Finland and Denmark. So why aren't we even better at keeping up with the technology change?
I think that one challenge here is that we will always feel that we're a bit behind. I have quotes from 150 years ago in magazines where people are just so frustrated of all new things happening. They're frustrated with the telegraph. Why do I want to know what's happening in Paris when I'm in New York, for example? They're frustrated with all the gossip and all the excess information, all the new things. So I think we just have to be a bit content with the fact that we will always feel a bit behind, actually.
Mm. So how is it that we keep up? I mean, technical change is one thing and the advances, but we also need to keep an ethical eye on it, and we also have to change our business modules. And that takes a little bit more time than the technical advances itself. It does,
it does. I mean, of course, technology is moving ahead in a rapid pace. Ourselves as individuals, our mindsets, we don't really keep up with that. The ethical perspectives, legal perspectives, politics, society as a whole. I mean, I think it's okay that things are a bit behind. I think it's okay that our legal framework does not keep up with all the new innovations. I think it has to be a bit slower, but it can be too slow, of course. And I mean, it's not up to me to decide how fast or slow. No.
What is too slow?
No. I don't think anyone would benefit from me writing the laws. So.
You showed Spotify here.
Yeah.
Is it true that you were asked to join them and invest, and that you turned them down?
Is this live? No. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, as everyone else, more or less everyone else. I'm friends with one of the founders, and he asked me in the spring of 2007 if I was interested in investing. Long story, but I said no.
Maybe not the right decision. Looking in the mirror.
Oh, you say that. Oh.
Nicklas,
I think you're right.
It was the right decision to come here today. I thank you so much for doing so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.